Hi, welcome to my channel and thank you to my subscribers. If you have not already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. In this video, we are going to see how to add sign in with Google option to your Spring Boot web application so that users who already have a Google credential, like a Gmail credential, can access your application without creating a separate credential for your web app. So signing in with Google credential is a very widely used option. It's called a social login basically. And the reason many websites use sign in with Google option is because they don't want their users to keep creating new credentials for each and every website and remember the passwords um, uh, for each and every website, which is a very difficult thing from a user point of view. And that is the reason why many websites support sign in with Google option. But it's mostly for, like, if you have seen, like, mostly it's the e-commerce sites, the news websites, or other subscription based websites or blog websites. These are the types of websites which generally support sign in with Google, whereas a banking application or a bank which has a website generally don't prefer sign in with Google because they don't want their user credentials to be stored in some other place. So they generally ask users to create a separate profile, separate account with username password for their own banking website. So it depends on the use case and depends on the application, web application that you're planning to build. So in this video, we will see how to build a Spring Boot web app from scratch and then add an authentication layer to that web app, which will allow the users to sign in with Google. So before getting into the steps of building a web app from scratch and configuring that app in Google API console and then testing the end-to-end flow, I will quickly go through the flow using this diagram, which will make it clear for you before getting into all those configuration steps. So when a user tries to access a web application, which is step number one, if that web application supports sign in with Google, you can have two different options, like have a login button where it says like you can sign in with Google, basically a login page where it says you can sign in with Google, or you can directly redirect the user to the Google sign in page where the user can enter their Google credentials and then access the application. What we are going to see here is the second option, where the website will automatically redirect to Google if there is no existing authentication session, and then the user needs to enter the credentials and sign in. So when the user tries to access the web app, in the step number two, you see a redirect to the Google login page. And this is the URL for redirecting to the Google login page. It's called as the authorize endpoint. So I will show these URLs, like how these URLs are obtained from Google. There is actually a configuration page that is exposed by Google where you can see all the URLs that you need to configure. And then once the user is redirected to the Google sign-in page, the user can enter their credentials. And once Google validates the credentials, it will redirect back to the application in step number 6 with an authorization code in the URL query parameter. And this is the standard OpenID Connect authentication flow if you are already aware of that protocol. And once Spring Boot web app gets that authorization code, it will call some backend APIs in Google, again a token endpoint to get the user details in the ID token, and then it will validate the token and the web app will allow access to that user. And within the web app, you can write some authorization logic based on the user's email address, like if you have any specific configuration stored for that user's email address within your database, and then based on the user name or user ID, the Google user email address, you can either allow or deny access to certain functionalities. So those are all some customizations you can do within your Spring Boot web app, but we are not going to get into those details in this demo. We will only look at how to add sign in with Google option to your Spring Boot web app. So now let's get to the next step of creating a web app. and then configuring that web app in Google API console, and then signing in with Google and testing the end-to-end application. So before getting into these steps, go to google.com, search for Springboot OAuth 2, and then open these two links, the top two links, in two separate tabs. We will be using some of the sample code that is already available in these two pages, and also some of the sample configurations that are available in these two pages. I will let you know what a particular section to copy and what modifications you need to do to make it work. And if you are not logged into your Google API console, just search for Google OAuth 2 and click this very first link and then open your Google API console. I will close this one. You will get to this particular page. And here you can select credentials se section, the credentials menu item, because that's where we will be configuring our app. So here select the credentials section, and we will get to this configuration at a later point of time. As a first step, let's go ahead and create the Spring Boot web app. So go to your Spring Tool Suite IDE, and if you're not if you have not used Spring Tool Suite IDE, you can download it from from the Spring website. You can search in Google and get this IDE. Or if you're already using any other IDE like Eclipse or IntelliJ, which you are already comfortable with, then you can go ahead and use it. The only thing is you need to make sure you can replicate the same steps that I'm going to do here with this IDE, and make sure you don't miss any of the steps or configuration. There might be slight differences in all these IDEs. So if any one configuration is missed out, then this integration won't work. And the reason I'm using Spring Tool Suite for this Spring Boot web app is because it comes from Spring and it has very good support for Spring framework. This IDE is entirely managed by Spring. So let's create a new Spring Starter project and name it as SB Google Demo, and select the type as Maven because we are going to use Maven build. Select next. Here search for security. Select Spring Security OAuth to client. Search for web and select Spring Web. So once you select all these three libraries, you will see the library name. So in the selected section here on the right side, just make sure all these three libraries are showing up. If not, again go back to the search and select these libraries. Click finish. It's going to take a minute to provision the project and then configure all the dependencies, the class path, everything. So let's wait for that step to get over. Yeah, it already created the project. It's just compiling here. So you can expand these src main Java. You will see the main Java class for your Spring Boot application. So all these things got automatically created by this IDE once you went through that Spring Starter project steps. And you can open the pom.xml file and you can view all the dependencies, like whatever we selected, what all libraries were selected got added here. So now let's go back to this first link that we opened, which is the blog, Spring Boot and OAuth 2 blog. Just scroll down and you can skip all these steps here and just come to this add a home page section. And we need to create an index.html file under src main resources static folder. So go back here and go to static, new file, index.html, and go back here, copy this source code and paste it here and save the file. And the next step is scroll down and we need to add these dependency jar files. The reason is this index.html is importing certain JavaScript files, CSS files, all those things for which we need to add these dependencies, because those are I think those dependent jar files and CSS files are available in these jars, the bootstrap jar, the jQuery jar. That is the reason why we need to add these jars here. So once that is done, uh, we can go here, scroll down. We already added this library. You can skip this. So you can skip everything here. Now what we are going to do is rename this application.properties to application.yaml. So there is no like difference between using a properties file versus YAML file with respect to how the application works. Delete this one actually. The only difference is the format. So in the case of application properties, I will undo this. You need to enter key value pairs. Whereas in the case of a YAML format, you need to enter the configuration in a YAML structure, that which we will see now. And I prefer YAML more than properties. If you are comfortable with properties, you can use the properties file structure, which is a key value pair. So now go back to the Chrome browser where I had opened all these documentation links and open the official Spring Boot OAuth 2 security documentation and scroll down, select OAuth 2 login and core configuration. If you scroll down a bit, you will see the sample configuration template for a Google identity provider. So copy that, paste it here. So now we need to update this Google Client ID and Google Client Secret, which we will be doing it now. So this Google Client ID and Secret comes from the Google API console, and we have not yet configured that. So we will do that in the next step. So go back to your Chrome browser and go to the Google API console. Let's actually create a totally new project. I already have existing projects, but I will create a totally new project, demo 1, and create. So the project is getting provisioned in Google API console. Select that project. So the very first step that we need to do is, if you look at this warning here, we need to configure a consent screen. So what is a consent screen? When you log into a new application using your Google credentials for the very first time, Google will show a consent screen where you need to select either allow or deny, continue or cancel the transaction. So I will show you during the demo, but at a high level, what a consent screen has asks the user is basically whether you are okay to share your details like first name, last name, email address to the application that you are trying to access. If you are not comfortable in sharing, then you can cancel and Google will throw an error, return an error back to that application that the user doesn't want to share the details. We will see that in the demo. As of now, configure consent screen, select external, create. So let's give a name for this application. It's Google, it's actually Spring Boot Google app. And for email address, my Gmail address, I'm giving my Gmail address. You can leave all the other things. And here again, it asks for email. I will give the click save and continue. And here you don't have to do anything. Save and continue, and back to dashboard. So the consent screen is configured. Go back to the credentials menu and click create credentials, OAuth client ID, and application type is web application. So we are building a Spring Boot web app, so it's a web application. If you are building any mobile apps, you can change the application type. So call it as SB Google Demo App. So here we have to add a redirect URI. And so again, go back to this core configuration document, scroll up a bit, and this is the redirect URI. Copy the link address, come back to this screen, paste it, and create it. So this redirect URI is the one where Google will redirect back to your application in step number 6. Since I'm running the application in local, the default Spring Boot port is 8080. So I'm giving the redirect URL as localhost colon 8080 slash auth2 code Google. But if you're running it in some server which has a website address, then you need to modify this URL accordingly and configure that same URL in your Google OAuth2 client. So copy this secret, replace it, client ID, and copy this client secret and replace it. So that's it. We are done with the basic configuration of adding Google sign-in support to our Spring Boot web app. But we have only done the basic steps, so let's quickly test it before enhancing this application to display some user details after the user logged in. So run as, right click the Java class, run as Spring Boot app. This one you can ignore, never remind again. That is just some warning. So I'm going to use my Mozilla browser for testing. I will clear the cookies in my browser using this plugin. The reason I'm using Mozilla is because I'm already using Chrome for all the other configurations. I am already logged into my Google account, and if I try to access the application, it will automatically redirect without showing the login page of the Google. And so I want to use a different browser. So when I did localhost 8080, it automatically redirected to my Google app. And if you look at here, it shows Spring Boot Google app, which is the exact name that I configured in this consent screen, Spring Boot Google app. So now when I log in for the very first time, Google will show a consent screen. So this is the consent screen, sign into Spring Boot Google app. This is the exact name we gave here. So if you look at the message here, by continuing, Google will share your name, email address, and picture, profile picture details to Spring Boot Google app, which is the app that we built. So basically, Google is asking you whether you are fine to share these details. If you don't trust a web application which is available in the internet, which is possible, it can be some uh, application built by a bad actor. If you don't trust, then don't ever share your details with that application when you try to sign in with Google. You can cancel it in this particular step, and Google will not share your details, which is basically first name, last name, email address, full name, profile picture, all those things. But in this case, it is my own local application. I trust this application, so I'm clicking continue. So we have successfully logged into the application, and that is the reason why you are seeing this message demo. But we are going to enhance this application to display some user full name, something like that, so that we know for sure that the application is working fine. Right now it just displays demo, and we don't know whether it's really working. So let me again sign out of my Google account. The reason is, if I don't sign out and next time when I access the application, even though the application redirects to Google, since I already have an established session with Google, it won't even show the login page. So that is the reason why. This is only for demo purpose. So I'm just signing out of Google account. Next time when we test again, it will show the Google login page. So now let's add some enhancements to index.html. Again, go back to that blog which we opened earlier. Scroll down to add a welcome page and copy this. Between the body tag below the div, first div, add it and format it. Scroll down, copy this script, and below this div, add it and format it. Excuse me. So what it basically does is this script will call a slash user endpoint in the backend. and get the user's full name and print it on the page. Only if the user is authenticated. If the user is not authenticated, which is basically unauthenticated, it won't even show the detail. Basically, this logged in as text. So for the slash user endpoint, we need to build an endpoint in our Java class, which we will do it now. So basically, if you go back to this blog, you can see that you need to add a slash add REST controller annotation to your main class and copy this method and paste it there. So when you add an add REST controller and do a command shift O or a control shift O depending on whether you are in Mac OS or Windows, and it will import all the packages for these annotations. Currently we are seeing error because those packages are not imported. Sometimes it will take some time. For the very first time when it is trying to import, it takes some time. So let's wait for it. But actually what is happening here is, yeah, now it came. Let me quickly add it. So all the packages got import. Just do a control shift O to make sure, or command shift O to make sure all the packages are the right packages are imported. So when you add at-rest controller to your Java class in your Spring Boot project, it means that class can start exposing API endpoints, and that is what we are doing here in a get mapping slash user. So this JavaScript function, when it calls $.get slash user, it will directly come to this particular method where it reads the user's full name from this OAuth to user principal object and returns the username back to that index.html. And this OAuth to user principal object is populated automatically by the Spring framework when you log in to this application. So those are all handled by the Spring framework, which is the beauty of this framework. You don't have to write much logic. And I will actually do one thing. I will start the application in a debug mode so that we will see what attributes are available inside this principal object. So let's start it in debug mode. And I will first log in to the application again. So again, localhost 8080, redirected to my Google login page, and I enter my password, and now it shows my username logged in as security in security action 101, which is my full username of my configured in my Google account. So now let me add a debug point here and refresh this page and see what all objects are available in this, what all attributes are available in this principal object. So now the control is here. So let's expand this principal and select the attributes. And here you can see that the issuer is accounts.google.com. The given name is security, which is my first name. And my profile picture, this is my URL. This is the URL of my profile picture. Just copy it and try opening it in a new tab, and you will see this is my profile picture for the Google account. And if you keep scrolling to the right, you can see this is the email address, and this is the family name, which is the last name action 101, and this is the full name security action 101. Let me actually go through this debug point again, refresh it and quickly go through it, and you can see this is my full name. So so what we did now is basically we are now printing the user's name. You can get any attributes like email, everything using this principal object, and you can identify the user based on that. And if let's say within your application there is a database based on the username, you have some authorization logic, authorization data in your database, you can write some authorization logic in your application to allow or deny access to that user. So now what we will do is I will again start this application in normal mode, not a debug mode. And I will again sign out of my Google account because I want to show you the network trace. So the application started. Let's again do this. Oh, sorry, I forgot to open this plugin. So this is a plugin that I'm going to use to show the network trace. It is called as SAML Tracer, which is available in Mozilla browser. So you can install it in your Mozilla browser and use it for tracking the network trace. Or you can use the Mozilla browser's built-in web developer tools as well, whichever you're comfortable with. So when I access localhost colon 8080, this is the URL that I accessed. It redirected to Google's login page. So this is the URL of the Google login page, accounts.google.com. And then it passes some parameters called client ID, response type as code, which is the authorization code grant flow in OpenID Connect protocol. And then it passes the scope that my application, that is my Spring Boot app, is requesting, which is OpenID profile email, and then some other parameters. And then the redirect URI as well. That is, once the user gets authenticated, Google will post the authorization code back to this redirect URL. So this is the same redirect URL we configured in the Google API console when we created that client. And this client ID is exactly similar to the one we added in the application.yml. So let me do a search here. So it's exactly the same client ID. Now let me log in again. I'm logged in. So when I logged into Google, after it went through some internal redirects within the Google website, which we are not really worried about. If you look at this particular step, localhost colon 8080 login auth to code Google. This is the redirect URL that we had configured in Google API console. So if you go here, the Google API console, and go to the credentials option and select the client ID that we selected, this is exactly the redirect URL that we configured here. And if you look at this diagram, the step number 6, Google redirects back to your application using that redirect URI that is configured here in your Google client web application for that web application. So if you look at this, so it redirected back to my local application. It passed the authorization code, which is then used as per this diagram, which is then used to call the Google token endpoint in the backend and get the user details in the ID token. And that ID token gets converted into a principal object, authentication principal object in Spring Boot. All these things happen in the backend, so you can't see it through your network trace unless you have some tools like Fiddler or something which tracks all the network trace from your going within your laptop. So in this case, it happens in the backend, and once it gets that authentication principal object, it prints that user name here as user's full name as security action 101. So now I will show you one more thing. So how did I get all these URLs like accounts.google.com, OAuth2.googleapis.com/token? How did I get all these URLs? So let me search for it. So Google OpenID Connect well-known. Just search for this and you will find the OpenID Connect authentication document for Google developers. So open that documentation and do a Control F, well-known. So this is the URL that I was talking about. Open this in a new tab. So here you can see all the endpoints like authorization endpoint. That is the login URL. Like if you open this, it actually goes to Google's login page. Like if you open this URL directly without passing any parameters, you will get this type of error, which is expected. Like required parameter is missing response type. But that is the login page URL. this is the token endpoint URL. Let's try accessing it directly. It it's not giving any error, but I'm sure there is some error. That's why it's giving a blank page. So this is the token endpoint. This is the user info endpoint. So what Spring does is basically when you say that when you add Google here as the identity provider, it automatically loads all these URLs, authorization endpoint, token endpoint, user info endpoint into its memory. And then whenever you try to access the application, it knows where to redirect to ask the user to log in using their Google credentials and all those things, and how to call the token endpoint. It loads all these URLs from that OpenID configuration response. And all these things happen in the background when you start the application. So you don't know what is really happening within the Spring framework. So that is the best thing about using these type of frameworks, that it takes care of many of these steps. The only thing you need to do as a developer is configure your application in the right way in Google API console, and then configure those values in the application.yaml, and then everything will work like a magic. Like, you don't have to do anything. And on top of that, if you want to add some customization, you can modify your Spring Boot web app and customize it according to your business requirements. So this is the end-to-end flow, and I'm sure you might face some issues since there are multiple steps. So feel free to add your questions in the comments, or if you face any issues, also please add it in the comments. I will try my best to resolve it. In some cases, if it is a very complex issue, it is very difficult to resolve it without looking at the entire end-to-end setup. And unfortunately, that is not possible. So I will try my best to resolve the issue through by replying to your comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please subscribe to this channel to support this channel, and I will be adding more such videos in the future, and I have already added lots of videos in the past. So please subscribe, and thank you for watching.